Now allow me, please, to lift up the local saint that we remember today. Maury Strobel, and let's use him as an illustration of God revealed the church. This is how I met him. This is the context in which I knew him best. Indeed, I was privileged to know him for a short while during my service as pastor of record for St. Paul's. My memory of him was a gentleman. My experience of him was a man attentive and loving to his wife, Audrey. After worship, as I stood at the door, they both would come by, and Audrey was often the more talkative one, but I could see over her shoulder there was Maury with a gentle smile and a patient smile. And then as they left, he would pause for a moment and say a few kind words. Always appreciated. But perhaps my most cherished memory of him was sitting by Audrey's bedside in the hospital. I came to visit, and we chatted for a while, and somehow turned to Sunday school songs. And Audrey broke out into song. Right there and then. And I was taken back. I was not quite prepared for that. But she encouraged us to join in, and there were old songs that I knew, but I was a little self-conscious about that. But there was Maury singing, nodding to me, encouraging me. And so we all joined together in the hospital room, the nurses and doctors passing by the doorway, and we had a little camp meeting right there. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. It is, for me, one of my prized God moments. And through Maury, God's soft power, not the hard power of the thunderstorm and the wind, but the soft power of God was revealed. The power of the Holy Spirit guiding, uniting, building community, even community as small as a marriage that had invited, at this particular time, a pastor to drop in and be a part of that community. God works through saints like Maury, and I have been blessed to know him.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm David Strobel. This is a memorial for Morris Strobel, an opportunity to remember my dad, Maury. Here with me today are my sister Kari, her husband Eric, and my mom, Audrey. Dad passed away 2 months shy of his 88th birthday from a stroke. It was in his sleep, it was peaceful, and while the timing was unexpected, his death was no surprise. He suffered from diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, and this was not his first stroke. Dad was, first and foremost, a hard worker. He didn't retire until his employer forced him to do so, and his retirement never sat well with him. He used the money he earned to not only provide a home for his family, but to fill a promise he made to me, to my sister Kari, and to my mom. That was to send us to college as far as we wanted to take it, and he would pay the full amount. He paid for my bachelor's degree, for Kari's, and for Mom's 3 degrees. He was generous with trips and vacations, perhaps acknowledging that experiences bring more happiness than things. Mom says that among her favorite memories are their trips to Norway, to Korea, to Egypt. I found Dad to be gruff but generous. As a child, I yearned to join the neighborhood kids on dirt bikes. For my 12th birthday, he bought me my first motorcycle, a second-hand Honda 50. That bike was the start of a major influence on my life. Since then, I've hardly had a year when I didn't own and ride a motorcycle. For a gift on my last summer before I graduated from college, Dad paid for a new tent and sleeping bag and gave me just enough money to ride from Indiana to California, but not enough to get back. Some would say that might have been him subtly telling me something, but Dad knew that an adventure like that was the best gift he could get me. To earn my first skydiving instructional rating 23 years ago, I needed to get from Indiana to Oklahoma for a course. Dad offered to go with me to split the driving and the expenses. He gave me moral support while I started to teach skydiving. When he married my mom, Dad not only married into her family, he married into Norwegian culture. Staying true to his adopted Scandinavian heritage, Dad led us by celebrating 7. Mai, or Constitution Day, Norwegian Independence Day. We ate Norwegian delicacies like lutefisk and lefse and pickled herring, and we made krumkake for Christmas treats. I didn't know I was half German until I was in junior high school and I realized that Strobel was not a Norwegian name. He was generous with his time. As a high school senior, I was part of our school choir, and I had a part-time job pumping gas at Gallagher's Mobile. Our last concert of the year fell on my scheduled time to work, and by the time I saw the conflict, I couldn't change my work schedule. Dad called Jerry Gallagher and asked if he could work my shift. Jerry told him that he could. So in the end, I was able to perform in my last concert. After the concert, Mom drove me to the gas station in the night and during a blizzard. Our car's headlights showed Dad bundled up in his overcoat, a Russian fur hat, and a scarf protecting his face, stoically pumping gas as the wind blew snow around him. His life was constantly shadowed with pain, starting with a hip broken by a fall from the top of a slide as a grade school child. Photos of him from that time show a grim, unsmiling boy with a stiff brace on one leg. All my life I saw Dad walking with a limp, often wincing. When he finally had an artificial hip installed, the doctor said that that bone had been worn down to the nub, and he was astonished that Dad could walk at all. Probably the most memorable aspect of Dad was his stories, and I'm sure many of you can think of at least a few. He told tales of his experiences, how he watched a B-58 Hustler simulating a Soviet invasion of South Dakota, how he was kicked out of kindergarten. That was a new one I just learned about a week ago. He told me of winning an Indian motorcycle in his last poker game in the Navy, and then riding that bone-shaking bike 1,000 miles from San Diego to South Dakota, not being able to stand the discomfort, and then selling it for the price of a bus ticket the rest of the way home. He described racing stock cars in Southern California as a sponsored driver, and test driving one of the first turbine cars in America. His stories of his experiences in the Navy inspired in me a love of the military from a young age. There's a picture of 6-year-old me in a replica Army uniform, holding a miniature M1 Garand. I begged Mom to buy me that replica rifle so I could practice the drill and ceremony exercises that came in a pamphlet with that toy gun. But his most vivid stories were of his combat during the Korean War. Dad had told me about his airborne training with Marine Yellowlegs prior to his deployment to Korea. He said that on his first jump, the jump master would yell, "Ready?" The jumper was to answer, "Ready." The jump master would shout, "Go," and then the paratrooper was supposed to then jump. Dad said he was last in line to board, so he was the first to exit the plane at altitude. Hooked up, standing inches from the door, the jump master called out, "Ready?" My dad answered, "Ready." The jump master shouted, "Go," and Dad, feet firmly planted on the floor of the plane, answered, "Go." The jump master put his boot in his backside and shoved him out. Dad told of his survival training, where he calculated where he would be dropped off, so he got a map of the area ahead of time, emptied his reserve to fill it with supplies, and how he returned to base 5 days later, having gained several pounds, while everyone else had starved for those days of training. As a child, walking through downtown Chicago, I'd ask him, that building was tall enough to jump from with a parachute? And he'd say, no, it has to be from an airplane. Well, we would round a corner, and I'd see a taller building and say, well, is that one tall enough to jump from? And he said, no, it has to be from an airplane. He was quite exasperated about the third or fourth time I would ask that. These jumping stories inspired me to become a skydiver, a base jumper, a test jumper for experimental parachutes, making more than 5,000 jumps so far. And about jumping from those skyscrapers in Chicago, I was so tickled when I showed him video of my first building jump and assured him that, yes, those buildings actually were tall enough. Dad described how he killed a Chinese soldier with a knife while on patrol with Turkish commandos. He was especially pleased when I was sent to Turkey during Operation Desert Storm. He told of how he saw civilians killed by U.S. offshore bombardment when he refused to call down fire by the heavy cruiser USS Rochester to prevent infiltration by North Korean soldiers. He told me about how he almost took out a North Korean officer when a sniper let him look through the scope, but he missed because he didn't quite estimate the wind properly. He explained that he turned down a Purple Heart when he cut his hand on barbed wire because he didn't feel that he deserved it with so many others grievously wounded. And he shared how much he hated the International Red Cross for selling cigarettes to troops when those cigarettes should have been freely given. The last story I heard from him was how he was sent to his assignment in Korea's hellishly frozen winter without adequate supplies, and a sympathetic and horny female supply officer not only geared him up but shagged him royally before sending him in a jeep to the front. Dad's stories were my inspiration to live an adventurous life. I decided this before I started kindergarten, that I wanted to have more and better stories than he did. But it looks like a lot of those stories never actually happened. When I worked on his VA benefits a few years ago, I saw his military records, and I discovered that much of what he claimed to have occurred during his time in the Navy absolutely could not have happened. When I checked into many of his other claims, they also didn't hold up. It never occurred to me that stories didn't have to be true to be good. I'm reminded of a story he told me when I was in grade school. It was about a mule he owned, one with a fiercely independent streak, a mule that after a long, rambling tale led to it crashing headfirst into a storefront, and my dad trying to get it out by pulling and pulling on the mule's leg. He paused, looked me dead in the eye, and smiled and said, "Just like I'm pulling yours." So Dad's tall tales entertained my mom, my sister, lots of people he encountered in his long life, including many of you. And they inspired a life of adventure, actual experienced adventure in me. Thank you.